Perth was gritty, overcrowded, the air was thick, the people were rough. It was a city on the edge of chaos at the best of times. Brisbane was the antithesis of this. It was a shining beacon, at least on the surface. Brisbane was everything you could want from a corpo paradise. Skyscrapers littered the skyline. Neon-lit catwalks and sky streets created a network of secondary and even tertiary levels to the city. Holographic billboards advertising anything you could possibly want. The people in a constant contest with their fellow citizen for who can look more exotic, more accomplished, more affluent. You'd think that a city on so many levels would have the worst of it at street level. Cities like New York, Sydney, and London, these places lived life on the ground and in the sky. But if you wanted a good view, you needed money. The top was for the wealthy, which meant that the ground level was for the scum that sunk to the bottom. Brizzy wasn't like that. It was, as I said, on the surface level, all flash and fancy from the concrete to the clouds. But the truth was there was scum here. Just, it had better taste and took pride in its appearance. Well, some of the choices weren't for me, but hey, if neon-lit poly dreadlocks and holographic tattoos are your jam, I won't judge. Much. Everyone in the city was projecting an image of who they wanted to be and aiming for the top, figuratively and literally. Dress for the job you want was never so true as here, though it was possibly more accurate to say, dress for the life you want. It was a city of corpo grifters and criminal entrepreneurs. Hunters here rode at a different level. I was not gonna fit in. As much as I didn't like it, Darcy insisted I get a few new items of clothing. You're gonna stand out like a sore thumb in that old junk. I looked down at my worn leather jacket and jeans, then over at Reva in her torn jeans and sleeveless leather jacket, with the chrome studs and an old Hailstorm t-shirt. What about her? Punk is very in, and the greenskins rock leather in a way you just don't. I frowned at Reva. Don't look at me, she said. I have style. She looked smug. Look, I'm not here for new kit or clothing. I just want to get the job done and get home. Darcy sighed like I was being an imposition. No one will give you the time of day while you look like that. I rolled my eyes. I wasn't in the mood for this nonsense. We were descending the building we were staying in a glass case external elevator that was stuck to the side of the building like a water drop on a pint glass. Because when I'm 40 floors above the ground, what I want to see below me is empty air. The city glowed like a damn disco ball in front of us. We weren't going all the way to street level, we were aiming for around the 30th floor, the first level up from the ground that was littered with skywalks and essentially a whole city in itself. Fine, just get me a new jacket and a pair of jeans. And a haircut. I eyed Reva. I'm sorry, but she's right. Half toasted isn't really a look. One side of my head had been lightly cooked from the fight with Sierra, and I hadn't had the inclination to try and clean it up yet. My once thick, if not always neat, long hair was now kind of short on one side. I gave in. Okay, what do you suggest? That was a question I really didn't want an answer to, but I got one nonetheless. 2 hours later, we had been to a barber and 3 menswear stores. I wasn't one for shopping. Most of my stuff came from second-hand shops. However, Darcy was buying, so I couldn't really complain. Well, I tried, but no one listened. By the time she was done, I was rocking a side cut, still mostly long on top. It accentuated my pointy ears, and I wasn't really keen on that. Even here in a city of such progress, half-elves weren't exactly respected. Not elvish enough to be elves, just elvish enough not to be human. It was the only thing the barber could have done, though, given the fire damage to my hair. For some reason, half-orcs were more readily accepted. Orcs found half-orc fillies like Reva almost exotic, and even though they were never as big as pure-blood bull orcs, half-orc men were seen as a more brutal kind of human. Most of all, though, they just didn't give a shit, and it showed. It was hard to put down a race that gave no fucks and could kick the shit out of you at a moment's notice. It was almost stylish. Speaking of stylish, I was dressed in something that I usually wouldn't be caught dead in. A black fitted vest and pants, a kind of faux silk, red button-up shirt with sleeves rolled up and gold trim. It was so over the top, and don't even get me started on the shoes. The other 3 outfits had been sent back to my apartment. Yes, 3 more, in case this took more than one night, which it probably would. If I was being honest, I was wondering how much I could sell them for when I got back home. Well, Darcy said, taking a step back and surveying her handiwork in the entrance of the last store, it's not perfect, but at least you'll fit in. I feel like an emo peacock. Reva stepped up and flicked my white forelock to one side. I like it. Well, that was all I needed to hear. That and the suggestive way she raised her eyebrow. Are you really sure this is necessary? Darcy handed me a card. It is if you want to get into this place. I took a look down at the glammed up rectangle. Myth? That's the same club that was the centre of business for all the girls. Uh-huh. Any contacts there? She shook her head. We never got that far. Hercule had only just put the files together from the scant police reports and tracked them down back to this place. It's the only spot all of them had in common. I turned the card over in my hand. Well, we're new here. You lead the way. We pulled up to the club in an auto cab. A robotic voice chimed in as we slowed to a halt and the door opened. Destination, Myth. Thank you for choosing Numa Cab Co. Watch your step when disembarking. Myth was exactly what I was expecting. On the second level of the city, it was jammed into a skyscraper and looked to be about 3 stories high. It was glam, it was bright, it was announcing itself to the world. More neon, more chrome. I was starting to see a pattern here. I could also see why my new threads were necessary. You had to have style to get in here. You had to have swagger. And be happy to wait in a fucking long line. Screw that. I thought I was feeling out of place until I looked at Darcy. Out of all of us, she now looked the most plain and also uncomfortable. You all good there? Reva asked as I climbed out. I'm not really into crowds. I'm not that kind of a gal. I looked around us at the milling population on the street. She saw my expression. Lots of people in closed space, it just kinda freaks me out. Uh-huh. So what's the plan then? I was sort of hoping you could take it from here. I raised an eyebrow at her and she seemed to shrink back. I'm just the handler, remember? I don't do field work. I had to give her that. Well, that just leaves you and me then. I looked at Reva. She grinned wolfishly. We got out and the door swung shut, then the cab took off down the street. I eyed the long line of people waiting for the whim of the doorman. I hate queues, so we skipped it. A flash of my badge took care of that. The bouncer looked me up and down, clearly judging the cut of my threads. Looking at the queue, I saw Darcy was right about how you dressed. Not a scuffed pair of jeans or sneakers in sight. The big orc didn't seem pleased about my profession though, but it was like letting cops in. They might not be good for business, but not letting them in is worse. He grunted consent and unhooked the rope. We stepped into Myth. For a Tuesday night, the club was pumping. Music with bass so heavy you could feel it in your chest. It was trying to replace your heartbeat, and it got under your skin in such a way you wanted to let it. The crowd was thick, the bar was packed. Conducting any investigation in here would be a bust if I didn't know that 99% of punters were a waste of time. Even the staff were useless. Well, most of them. You could pick up the ones who paid attention. The ones with fast hands but steady eyes. The ones who had a calm outward appearance despite the chaos. I hadn't been 100% honest with Darcy. I had done some digging while Reva had taken her out to get food. Well, Fia had. First things first, Darcy was legit. That was only a quarter Rio and it had it sorted out. Second thing, well, That was a bit of an odd one. The bit of digging Fia had done said that she had no siblings. That didn't really mean anything. A lot of people tried to hide their past for various reasons. Someone with a few connections in the department could easily cover that up. Why would they want to, though? That was the question. However, Fia had run the photo of the dead girl through some software and it had spat out that the two were very likely related. The dead girl in question, her name was Gemma, as far as the reports were concerned. I had my doubts. The scant amount of info on her said that she had no relatives. I put that down to no one giving enough of a shit to do any real digging, and no one came forward. Did any of this matter? Probably not. It was just my curiosity. I was out here hunting a Jack the Ripper wannabe. He just had the misfortune to kill someone who had someone who knew people who knew people. I had told Darcy I didn't want to do this because I was scared of someone dying. She had thought I'd meant her. I hadn't. I looked to Reva as she surveyed the crowd. She was calm, cool under pressure, a natural-born fighter, and a hunter now all but in title. She could handle herself. That's what I kept telling myself anyway. The music was so loud I wished we still had our telepathic connection. As it was, I had to yell over the song. "What do you reckon?" Her eyes flicked to the bar. "Let's ask questions over by the booze." I doubted the beer would know anything of importance, but while she was interrogating a pint, I would try and flag down the bartender. Getting to the long chrome strip was half a mission in itself. Getting the attention of the barman, twice the mission. In the end, I pulled a bit of a dick of a move and grabbed his arm, then flashed my badge. His pissed off frown turned into an almost "fuck me, I don't have time for this shit" look. He was a tall and skinny half-elf like me, with no ink but a lot of piercings. Task the first. I held up one finger. A pint for the lady. I jerked a thumb at Reva, who stood there with her elbow on the bar, chin in her palm. She gave a smile and a wave. He conceded with a nod and started to fill a frosty glass with the house favourite. Task the second. I held up a second finger while I had his eye. The girls that work this club. I emphasized the word work. They all the same regulars? His eyes flicked from Reva back to me. It said, "No judgment." "You looking for some action?" I raised an eyebrow and tapped my badge where it sat in the leather wallet beneath my fingers. No, but someone was. Some action that got out of hand. Know anything about that? He looked around the bar. I couldn't tell if he was anxious that I was asking that or if he was anxious that he wasn't really working. I pulled out 2 greens and slid them across the bar. He made them disappear so fast, I questioned if I ever had them in my hand. "You always get the same punters looking for their favourites. We let the girls walk the walk in here as long as they give us a little scratch." "There pimps in on that too?" Reva asked. He shook his head. "The local bikie gangs run the street action around here, but any girl who wants to go freelance, she needs a safe place to strut her stuff. The club's our territory, our rules. We let the solo girls do their thing in here, the other girls do it on the street." It figured. Any girl who got wasted who had connections with the bikies would have some big, angry fellas asking stern questions. Of course, these girls were free agents. There wasn't anyone to go looking for them after they disappeared. That also told me something important. The killer knew how the industry worked, or at least well enough not to piss off the wrong people. I slid out a data slate and held up the screen displaying faces of the girls in question. Fia had managed to pull some unmutilated pictures of them, mostly from the charge sheets in the local cops database. "Recognize any of them?" He shrugged. "Well, sure, all of them." I nodded. "You see anyone hassle any of them on the regular acting creepy?" He gave me a level look. "What, like more than usual?" Reva finished off her beer and slid the glass back down the bar to him. "All these girls ended up shredded in a back alley." His face went pale. "Legit?" I nodded. He swallowed and ran a nervous hand through his hair. "Look, I don't pay that much attention. You need to go and have a word with Al." "Al?" Reva asked, while indicating for him to refill the glass. "He's the head of security, lives up in the crow's nest with all the security feeds, watches like a hawk." He pointed to the door in the far-off wall. "Through there. Follow the stairs. I'll buzz you through." I thanked him and we moved away, letting him go back to the vital task of relieving people of their money and sobriety. True to his word, he unlocked the door and we stepped through, closing it behind us. The sound shut off almost completely. "With any luck, we can get an ID on this guy and move nice and fast. Be over and done with," I said as we climbed the stairs. "Don't get your hopes up. I got a feeling this won't be easy." "It never is," I thought begrudgingly. I was right. It never was that easy. We knocked on the door to the office at the top of the stairs. The reply was to have 2 sentry guns drop out of the ceiling and zero in on us. A voice spoke over a comm in the door. "Turn around and walk away, and I'll consider not shooting you in the back." I found the camera in the panel that held the speaker next to the door. This was where I would have silently invaded the system and forced my way in. Would have being the key words. Like Reva had said, I had to learn to do things the old-fashioned way now. I tried not to let the uncertainty show as I leant in closer. "You really don't want to do this, mate?" "You're telling me the cleaner already came today. She won't be back until the end of the week." "No, I mean I have one of these." I held up my badge to the camera. "And unless you want to see more of them as you're turned into Swiss cheese, I suggest you pack those away. Killing hunters is a federal crime, and we take that kind of thing personally." "I've got nothing you want, Hunter. Beat it." "I beg to differ, but if you let us in, we can discuss this in a more comfortable manner." I eyed the barrel a mere meter from my face. How I wanted to flex on him and shut that thing down, stroll in like I owned the place. It pained me to know it wasn't an option anymore. "Look," I continued, "we can do this the hard way for me, or we can do this the hard way for you. Either way, I'd prefer to avoid either of us getting filled with lead." There was a silence while we thought it over. "You've got 10 seconds to sell me on the idea." "I'm sure it would be bad for business if word got out that only working girls from this club are getting wasted out in the streets." "What are you talking about?" "Even worse if the punters start to question if they're next, right? A pretty girl is a pretty girl. Any of them could be the next target." "Is that a threat?" "No, it's a prediction. You help me and I can stop this story before it gets out." "You mean before you let it out?" Tomato, tomato. Another break in negotiations while he mulled it over. "Fine, but make it quick." There was multiple clicks, the sound of mechanical and magic locks. Either this guy was neurotic as all hell, or he got some very angry customer feedback. The door swung open, we stepped inside cautiously. I wasn't 100% convinced he wasn't still intending to just waste us. I was expecting a room, small, full of empty cans, discarded food wrappers, and lit by only a dozen screens. A chunky nerd nesting in his own festy domain. I was pleasantly surprised. It was well lit to begin with. There was a screen array integrated into one wall. It was clean too. Whether because he hadn't been joking about the cleaner having been here today, or because he was naturally a neat guy. The floor was plush carpet, the furniture all polished steel. No smudges. Our new friend was seated behind a glass-top desk, in a white and blue suit rocking a sky blue mohawk. Human. Probably mid-40s. "Make this quick, I'm a busy man." I took a moment to give the room a secondary inspection. "Going out on a limb, you're not just head of security, are you?" He grinned and slid a cigarette out of the packet in his breast pocket. "No," he spoke as he lit up. "I happen to be the owner, but I started out in security, so I let the other people handle management, and I stick to what I'm good at. We all have our niches." Reva stayed by the door. I walked slowly across the room and motioned to one of the 2 chairs. "May I?" He nodded. I sunk into the soft leather. "Your security?" He pointed to Reva with his cig. "My girlfriend." "Ah, I thought she looked too protective to be security." You both hunters, or does she just like to watch? You threw her a wink. Reva rolled her eyes and pointedly turned away, looking to the screens. I ignored him. I'll cut to the chase, Al. Working girls have been torn to pieces in back alleys around here, and the only thing they all have in common is your club. You think someone from my club is involved? His hackles were up instantly. No one in my club is that kind of twist. I can vouch for every single employee. I held up a hand, placating him. I'm sure you can, for what it's worth. But no, most people aren't dumb enough to shit where they eat. But someone is choosing their targets here. And you want to see what we have stored in the old memory banks. I gave him an ingratiating smile. It would be much appreciated. He took in a deep breath and let out a perfect smoke ring. I bet. And while I would love to help you on your little mission, a little donation wouldn't go astray. I raised an eyebrow. The longevity of your club isn't incentive enough? I have lots of wheels spinning, lots of cogs turning. They could use a little grease to make the transfer of this data go smoothly. He smiled. How much? I asked, resigning myself to 10 minutes of bantering. 4K, I'm not greedy. Seriously? I didn't have to act surprised. 4, for stopping a psycho from pissing in your pond. He narrowed his eyes. Got a counter offer? 2. 3, 8. 2, 4. 3, 5. How about we just call it 3 like we know we're gonna anyway and shake on it? He gave me a lascivious grin. Deal. We shook hands and he relaxed back into his chair. You still have one problem, though. Really? What's that? That's days' worth of footage over dozens of cameras. It's a metric shit-ton of sifting. I smiled. Lucky for me, I have one of the best sifters in the country. How many fucking hours of footage? Fia asked, a little shocked and very pissed off. Just under 400? You're joking, right? What's the problem? You have that facial recognition software, don't you? Oh, sure, but in a club of hundreds of people an hour? It'll throw up so many estimate matches, it'll take me days to manually check them all. We only need to find the faces that interacted with the girls, cross-reference their image from the files and the footage and isolate them. She froze. Wow, that was almost a clever idea. I rolled my eyes. I'm not just a pretty face. You're not a pretty face. We were standing out on the curb, the club was behind us, throwing long shadows across the skywalks with the lights of pink and blue outlining us. She threw up her hands. Fine, it's not like I have anything better to do anyway. You're a gem. No shit. I shouldn't have been patronizing her. It was a new moon tonight and she was twitchy as hell. Look, I really need to lock myself in. She ran her fingers nervously through her hair. There is one more thing, though. We began to stroll down the walkway, putting the nightlife behind us. There was no reason to keep poking around in there, not until I knew who or what I was looking for. Your new friend, she's not who she says she is. I froze, others on the street parting to move past me as I became a rock in the flow of foot traffic. Reva took a few more steps before realizing I'd stopped and turned to regard me. Really? The anger in my voice must have bled through as Fia held up a hand to forestall me. Oh, don't get me wrong, she is a handler. She did work with Hercule, but her past is fabricated. I did some digging and found some common elements that she shares with people in the witness protection system. That I didn't expect. Wait, so she's a cache? Fia smiled anxiously. I gotta go. I don't know what her deal is, but she's got some bad juju in her past. I thanked her and hung up. What's the deal? Reva asked, pushing some of the street crowd aside to make her way back to me. Darcy's a cache, I reiterated. Reva looked perplexed. A what? I wasn't really looking at her, despite her being in my field of vision. I was turning over the possibilities in my head. Sorry, what? What's a cache? I shrugged. A witness who's gone into hiding. You have to have stood against someone who did some pretty heinous shit to be put in the WPS. We call them caches because they're full of useful information, but you gotta dig around to uncover them. And Darcy is one of these. Did Fia say what case she was a part of? I shook my head. No, but I would just love to know what her story is. Thank you very much for listening to Cyphers Edge. If you enjoy this podcast, a subscription to the channel will be most appreciated. If you'd like more content from me, you can find me on various social media platforms. I also have a Discord. It's a small community, but we'd love to see you there to talk about the genre and any other topics that relate to the podcast, literature, or sci-fi and cyberpunk. As always, the script and narration were done by JJ Brandis, myself, and the music was done by Cale McLeish. Copyright Cyphers Edge 2026.